23 Grand Prix wins, 3 World Championships, and revolutionary technical contributions that changed how teams approach tire strategy and car development. So, why exactly was Nelson Piquet Senior so hated? Today, we'll find out.
Eu me lembro que fizeram assim, pra quem se dedica o campeonato? Não, pô, foi o que eu ganhei, pô, vou dedicar pra quem, pô?
Nelson Sotomayor, yes, that's the full name, was born into Brazilian high society in 1952 as a son of Brazil's former health minister. Young Nelson was groomed for tennis greatness at 12. His parents had it all planned out. Tennis school in California, professional career, respectable upper-class lifestyle. However, while Nelson was whacking balls around Californian courts, Emerson Fittipaldi was conquering Formula One and capturing Brazil's imagination. Nelson watched Fittipaldi win championships and thought, screw tennis, I'd rather drive cars. The teenage rebellion was spectacular. He had to sneak around using his mother's surname, Piquet, just to go racing, hiding his motorsport activities from disapproving parents who cut off all financial support when they discovered his true passion. His father pushed him toward engineering, but Nelson dropped out after a year, sold his road car to buy a Formula V single-seater, won the Brazilian Championship in 1977, and essentially told his family to go to hell. With advice from Fittipaldi and £10,000 scraped together from various sources, Nelson headed to Europe. After dominating British Formula 3 with 13 wins in 1978, breaking Jackie Stewart's record, he caught Bernie Ecclestone's attention. His F1 debut came with Ensign at Hockenheim in 1978, where he started 21st and retired on lap 31 with an engine failure. Not exactly glamorous, but it was a foot in the door.
I have only to be in front of Carlos and in the points.
Bernie Ecclestone made Piquet full-time Brabham driver for 1979 alongside double world champion Niki Lauda. The BT48 was a ground effect nightmare powered by an unreliable Alfa Romeo engine, so Piquet retired from 11 of 15 races, but when he didn't crash, he was often out-qualifying Lauda, a clear sign that this kid had serious speed. When Lauda shocked everyone by retiring mid-season at the 1979 Canadian Grand Prix, literally walking away after Friday practice because he was bored, Piquet became Brabham's team leader by default at age 27. It doesn't seem like much by today's standards, but back then, it was real young. 1980 brought the revolutionary Ford-powered BT49, and Piquet exploded into race-winning form. He won at Long Beach, leading from start to finish on the unforgiving street circuit. By season's end, he'd added victories at Zandvoort and Monza, going into the Canadian Grand Prix with a genuine chance to beat Alan Jones for the championship. Then came classic Piquet drama. At the start, Jones and Piquet touched at the first corner, triggering a massive pileup. For the restart, Piquet transferred to his spare BT49, but team management had forgotten to change the practice engine overnight. When Piquet was comfortably leading the restart, the engine blew, handing the championship to Jones. Piquet finished second, 13 points behind, but everyone knew already that 1981 would be his year. Yes, Williams' team had the fastest car in 1981. However, they were destroying themselves from within. Alan Jones and Carlos Reutemann hated each other, and this was where Piquet's political genius first showed itself. After winning in Germany and collecting a succession of podiums through tactical patience, Piquet went into the season finale at Las Vegas, leading Reutemann 50 points to 49. The championship could go to any of the 3 drivers, Piquet, Reutemann, or Jacques Laffite. The Las Vegas Grand Prix was held in a Caesars Palace parking lot because nothing says pinnacle of motorsport like racing between slot machines in 104-degree heat on an absolutely flat and boring circuit. Reutemann started from pole, but lost 4th gear early. In a brilliant drive, Piquet overtook the fading Reutemann and cruised home 5th, winning his first world championship by a single point. It was a masterclass in doing exactly what was needed. Nothing more, nothing less.
I think it's very good for him, very good for motor race also. I like Lauda.
In 1982, Brabham switched to BMW's experimental 1.5-liter turbo engine, a fire-breathing monster that produced massive power but exploded, well, constantly. Piquet essentially became BMW's crash test dummy, doing most of the development work while suffering through one of the most frustrating seasons imaginable. The 1982 season ended with just 1 victory. However, by 1983, the BMW Turbo was finally reliable. Plus, Piquet had the perfect weapon, Gordon Murray's aerodynamically revolutionary BT52, which allowed him to win his 2nd world championship. By 1986, Nelson Piquet was a double world champion hungry for more, so he made what looked like the perfect career move, joining Williams alongside Britain's rising star Nigel Mansell. On paper, it was a dream lineup. Two world-class drivers in the best car on the grid, powered by Honda's dominant turbo engines. In reality, it became Formula One's most toxic workplace environment ever. Frank Williams promised Piquet #1 status and doubled his salary to £3 million per year. Serious money, even by today's standards. The 1986 season started perfectly for Piquet. He won on his Williams debut at home in Rio, establishing early championship leadership. However, Mansell proved far more competitive than Piquet had anticipated. The Englishman wasn't content to play second fiddle to anyone, regardless of what contracts said or how much more money Piquet was earning. Mansell won 5 Grand Prix to Piquet's 4 in 1986, and each victory felt like a personal insult to the Brazilian. Of course, Piquet's ego couldn't handle it. The Australian Grand Prix finale was peak Williams dysfunction and perfectly summarized how their internal warfare was destroying both drivers' chances. Mansell led the championship by 6 points and needed only 3rd place to win his first title. Instead, a spectacular tire explosion on the main straight ended his championship dreams. Williams then compounded the disaster by pitting Piquet for precautionary tire changes, despite him running second and perfectly positioned to win the championship if Mansell failed to score. With that move, the team managed to hand the title to Prost while possessing clearly the fastest car on the grid. Piquet was absolutely furious and convinced that Williams had deliberately sabotaged his title chances by refusing to order Mansell aside when it mattered. Rather than blame team management privately, like a normal person, Piquet went public, and that's exactly where he went absolutely mad.
3, 4, 5, I don't know how many years I want to do in Formula One.
What followed was the most vicious personal attack in F1 history, and it revealed the true depth of Piquet's capacity for cruelty. Arriving for the 1987 season, Piquet pulled one of the most calculated power moves in F1 history. He slipped a note under Frank Williams' hotel room door, announcing he was leaving for Lotus at season's end. It was brilliant manipulation. He had removed any long-term considerations from Williams' strategy decisions and forced them to act in his favor this season. The 1987 Williams FW11B was arguably the most dominant car of the turbo era, powered by Honda's most potent V6 and featuring revolutionary reactive suspension that automatically controlled ride height. Piquet was instrumental in developing the active suspension system, but tried to keep the best settings from Mansell. However, Mansell still won 6 races to Piquet's 3, dominated qualifying sessions, and led more laps. By every conventional measure, Mansell was the faster driver in 1987. But Piquet didn't care about conventional measures. He started spreading the rumor that his massive crash at Imola, where he hit the Tamburello wall at high speed during qualifying, had affected him more than he was admitting. Basically, this meant that he could win the championship even while supposedly struggling with head injuries, which in turn would make Mansell look even worse for losing to a damaged driver. But Mansell kept winning, but also kept making crucial mistakes. At Spa, patience would have won Mansell the race. However, he clashed with Ayrton Senna instead. At Adelaide, Mansell crashed during practice and couldn't start the final 2 races. When it mattered most, Piquet's calculating approach trumped Mansell's raw speed and emotion. The championship was decided at Suzuka when Mansell's practice crash ruled him out completely. Piquet won his 3rd title with a race to spare, having mastered the art of winning championships without necessarily being the fastest driver. After the season, Playboy magazine interviewed Piquet, and this interview was absolutely nuts. Piquet went on record calling Mansell argumentative, rude, uneducated blockhead with a really ugly wife. This wasn't heat of the moment trash talk after a racing incident, so the reaction was immediate and explosive. Mansell himself called the comments out of order and described Piquet as a vile man. The British tabloids savaged Piquet's character, turning him into public enemy #1 throughout the United Kingdom. But here's the fascinating part. Piquet didn't apologize. If anything, he doubled down. He claimed Williams was favoring Mansell and that his trash talk was justified. The man genuinely believed that destabilizing his teammate was a legitimate competitive strategy. However, if the Mansell feud was strategic, Piquet's campaign against Ayrton Senna was pure personal venom that revealed the ugliest side of his character.
Em 2 semanas, 2 dobradinhas brasileiras. E nessa corrida de Detroit com uma particularidade.
As Senna's star rose in the late 1980s, Piquet watched Brazil's new golden boy steal his thunder. Therefore, the response was some of the most homophobic trash talk in sports history. Piquet represented old-school Brazilian racing, upper-class, politically connected, technically brilliant, but emotionally cold. Senna embodied the new generation, intense, spiritual, media-savvy, and genuinely beloved by fans worldwide. Brazil only had room for one racing god, and Senna was winning the popularity contest by a landslide. Piquet's psychological campaign was calculated for maximum damage in 1980s Brazilian machismo culture. He constantly questioned Senna's sexuality, making the infamous comment, "Just ask him why he doesn't like women." The rivalry reached its most toxic point when Senna allegedly retaliated by sleeping with Piquet's future wife. The story became an F1 legend, which just shows that for those two, words weren't enough. And by the way, Piquet has never been the one to shy away from violence as well. Like at the 1982 German Grand Prix at Hockenheim, where he was leading the race in his Brabham BMW, desperately needing points in what had been a frustrating season of mechanical failures. Along came Eliseo Salazar, who Piquet caught while lapping slower cars. As Nelson moved to overtake into a chicane, Salazar missed his braking point and collided with the race leader. Well, that was right at Piquet's boiling point. He jumped out of the car and started throwing punches and kicks at the Chilean driver right there on the side of the track.
It's raining very heavily. For sure, if you start the race now, after one lap, we'll be finished the race.
After years of psychological warfare and political maneuvering, Nelson finally outsmarted himself. The Lotus 100T chassis was an aerodynamic disaster, structurally weak, poorly balanced, and completely incompatible with Honda's V6 turbo. After 20 wins and 3 championships through 1987, Piquet managed 0 victories in 1988, watching helplessly as Ayrton Senna won 8 races for McLaren in what should have been identical machinery. For a driver who'd spent years telling the world how superior he was to everyone else, being comprehensively beaten by Senna and the same Honda engines was the ultimate humiliation. Worse still, Senna was doing it with grace and dignity, everything Piquet had never been interested in providing. With his championship days clearly behind him, Nelson's mischievous side shone bright. He was making outrageous comments about drivers who were now clearly better than him, desperately trying to stay relevant through controversy. He attacked Senna as the Sao Paulo taxi driver. He called Keke Rosberg a turd that has no value. He told anyone who'd listen that Enzo Ferrari was senile and that Ferrari would perform better if Enzo was 30 years younger. Piquet's final act came at Benetton for 1990, where he managed to negotiate an incentive-based contract paying $50,000 per point and $100,000 per victory. At 38, he was racing purely for money. For most of the season, he'd been written off by most, considered a fading veteran taking up space that younger drivers deserved. Then came the season's final 2 races, where Nelson reminded everyone why he'd been so dangerous for over a decade. He won the penultimate race in Japan, then followed up with victory in the season finale at Australia, his first wins since 1987 and a perfect middle finger to everyone who'd counted him out. The timing was exquisite. Piquet finished 3rd in the championship behind Senna and Prost, filling his bank account while proving he could still embarrass faster drivers when everything aligned. After announcing his F1 retirement early in 1992, Piquet couldn't resist one more racing challenge. He tried IndyCar racing at Indianapolis, where the racing gods finally delivered the reality check he'd been dodging for years. A massive crash left him with crushed legs and a stark realization of mortality. One might hope that after retiring, Nelson Piquet Senior would mellow out. No. If anything, age made Piquet even more unapologetic.
Being honest, who was the best? You and Senna. I said, I'm alive.
Yeah. You don't know how to say to the engineer what the problem was the car.
For a while, Piquet was out of the spotlight, focusing on business ventures in Brazil and supporting the career of his son. Nelson Piquet Jr. had his own infamous moment with the Crashgate scandal, proving the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, perhaps. During the Singapore Grand Prix in 2008, he deliberately crashed his car on team orders to trigger a safety car, helping his teammate Fernando Alonso win the race. The scandal, later dubbed Crashgate, exploded when Piquet Jr. revealed the plan after Renault dropped him from the team. It became one of F1's biggest cheating controversies, with Renault's team boss banned and reputations ruined. By the way, I've made an entire video about the 2008 Formula 1 season. You should check it out, as Crashgate was not the only insanity. And if you made it this far into the video, consider subscribing to the channel, as we're trying to break through 35,000 subscribers by the end of summer. Subscribe. We didn't see the Wild family a lot after that, but whenever Piquet Senior did appear, he made sure people noticed. Case in point, the 2014 Brazilian Grand Prix podium ceremony. Piquet was invited as the interviewer for the top 3 finishers. Nico Rosberg had won the race, with Lewis Hamilton second. However, Piquet essentially ignored the winner. Instead, he went straight to Hamilton and started asking bizarre personal questions about Lewis's then-girlfriend, pop star Nicole Scherzinger. Piquet then wandered off mid-interview to chat randomly with Felipe Massa, leaving Rosberg standing there wondering if this was really happening. Just when you thought Piquet might have mellowed with age, the 77-year-old decided to remind everyone why he'd always been Formula One's ultimate villain. In November 2021, during a Brazilians podcast discussing Lewis Hamilton's crash with Max Verstappen at Silverstone, Piquet used the racial slur.
O Neguinho meteu o carro e deixou.
The comments didn't surface publicly until June 2022, but when they did, the reaction was swift and absolute. Formula One, which by then had launched diversity campaigns like We Race as One, condemned Piquet immediately. Mercedes and drivers across the grid voiced support for Hamilton. However, it got worse. Additional footage emerged of Piquet using not just racist but also homophobic language about Hamilton in a 2016 interview, asking whether Hamilton must have been gay at the time when discussing Nico Rosberg's 2016 championship. The man who'd spent decades attacking drivers' sexualities was still at it in his mid-70s. The consequences were unprecedented for Piquet. F1 banned him from the paddock. A Brazilian court ordered him to pay 5 million reals in damages, but even facing universal condemnation and serious financial consequences, Piquet couldn't bring himself to offer a genuine apology. His statement claimed the Portuguese term was colloquial and not intended as racist, a classic non-apology. There are many controversial drivers, so why did I call Nelson Piquet Senior the king of F1 haters? Well, while other drivers accidentally stumbled into controversy, Piquet deliberately engineered himself as the main character of every F1 storyline by making everyone else react to him. His genius wasn't in being hated, it was in controlling the hate, funneling it, and using it to dominate every conversation in the paddock. Piquet basically transformed F1 into the Nelson Piquet show. Every interview became about, what do you think of Piquet's latest comments? He had successfully weaponized being the villain, turning hatred into the ultimate performance enhancer. Would this same strategy work in current F1, or will everyone get cancelled way before that? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe